Hey everyone, welcome back. So today's episode we're going to be tackling the second part of the seals of the Prophetic Scroll in Revelations. So in this one we're going to tackle the third, fourth, fifth, and the sixth seal, and the final segment, which is the next one, we'll tackle the last part of the prophetic scrolls. And so definitely still encouraging everyone to take a look at all the references that are mentioned in here and just look them up for yourself, and do your own research as well, and talk to your leaders in your church to make sure that everything lines up with what your church is believing. Please do hit the little like, share, and subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss any further videos. And if you're listening on my podcasts, hit the little follow button and please do share. The third seal is war's consequences. When the Lamb opened the third seal, I looked, and there before me was a black horse. Its rider was holding a pair of scales in his hand. Then I heard what sounded like a voice among the four creatures, saying, "A quart of wheat for a day's wages, and 3 quarts of barley for a day's wages, and do not damage the oil and wine." Revelation 6:5-6. This seal portrays an extreme scarcity of food and other basic necessities of life. It corresponds to Christ's third warning, "And there will be famines," Matthew 24:7. The scarcity of food resulting famines are the natural aftermath of war. At the time of the end, military conflicts among nations will destroy property and disrupt agricultural production, leading to widespread and severe scarcity of food and other necessities. The fourth seal, the mounting toll. When the Lamb opened the fourth seal, I looked, and there before me was a pale, sickly-looking horse. Its rider was named Death, and Hades, the grave, was following close behind him. They, all 4 horsemen, were given power over a fourth of the earth to kill by sword, famine, and plague, and by the wild beasts of the earth. Revelation 6:7-8. The fourth seal describes widespread disease, epidemics, and death in the wake of war and famine and previous seals. This corresponds with the fourth condition listed by Jesus, pestilence, or deathly epidemics of sickness and disease, Matthew 24:7. His mention of natural disasters such as earthquakes also fits within the context of plagues that bring widespread death. Moreover, all these elements, war, famine, pestilence, and other calamities, reinforce each other. Wars and other disasters lead to famines and pestilences, which lead to further fighting over resources. The wild beasts of the earth become a concern in times of societal breakdown, and the reference here could also be to disease carriers such as rats and even microscopic pathogens, such as what we're seeing right now with pandemics, and the fact that they just get worse every single time we see them come around. At the time of the end, we can expect such dire conditions to impact the various nations and regions of the earth, and the faithful people of God living among them. Conditions in some areas may be similar to the last days of ancient Israel, when God told Jeremiah he would consume them by the sword, by famine, and by pestilence. Jeremiah 14:12. God does not want his servants to be surprised by outbreaks of such tragedies, but to look to him for help and deliverance. The fifth seal, a religious persecution. After the 4 horsemen, Jesus opens yet more seals. John writes, "When he opened the 5th seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God and the testimony they had maintained. They called out in a loud voice, 'How long, sovereign Lord, holy and true, until you judge the inhabitants of the earth and avenge our blood?' Then each of them was given a white robe, and they were told to wait a little longer until the number of their fellow servants and brothers who were to be killed as they had been was completed. Revelation 6:9-11. Symbolically pictured as at the altar in God's temple, those who have already given their lives as martyrs in his service are still waiting on the eve of the day of the Lord for God's judgment on those who hate him, his ways, and his servants. But they will have to wait a little longer, because another massive martyrdom of God's faithful must first occur. Christ had already explained to his disciples what must take place. Then they will deliver you to the tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will be offended, will betray one another, and will hate one another. Then many false prophets will rise up and deceive many. And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. Matthew 24:9-12. The early church had scarcely been established before persecution set in. Several of the letters of the apostles refer to the suffering and martyrdom of faithful members at the hands of the enemies of the church. Most of the apostles met a violent and early death. The epistles of 2 Timothy and 2 Peter record final encouraging thoughts of Paul and Peter as they awaited execution. Brutal persecution and harassment continued in the following decades and on into later centuries, and it will happen again. Jesus explained that the worst persecution and martyrdom would come at the time of the end, for then there will be great tribulation, nor such has never been since the beginning of the world, and until it's this time, no, nor ever shall be. And unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved alive. But for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. Matthew 24:21-22. As we will see more clearly later, people who refuse to worship the image of the beast in the last days will face possibility of execution. Revelation 13:15. The primary targets of this carnage will be those who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Additional prophecies explain that this time of great tribulation and persecution will also afflict the modern physical descendants of the 12 tribes of ancient Israel. The sixth seal, signs in the skies. Then we come to a major transition. I watched as he opened the sixth seal. There was a great earthquake. The sun turned black like sackcloth made of goat hair. The whole moon turned blood red, and the stars in the skies fell to the earth, as late figs drop from a fig tree when shaken by a strong wind. The sky receded like a scroll, rolling up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. Did Christ earlier explain when, in the sequence of the prophesied events, these awesome and fearful heavenly signs would occur? He certainly did. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Matthew 24:29. Now notice in the concluding description of the sixth seal, what is to follow the heavenly signs. And the kings of the earth, the great men, the rich men, the commanders, the mighty men, every slave and every free man hid themselves in the caves and in the rocks and the mountains, and said to the mountains and the rocks, Fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath is come, and who is able to stand? Revelation 6:15-17, and that can be compared to Zephaniah 1:14-17. Note the order of these three separate events. First comes the tribulation, as described in the fifth seal. Heavenly signs, described in the sixth seal, occur. After the heavenly signs is the day of the Lord, the day of God's wrath. The heavenly signs occur after the time of the tribulation has begun, but before the day of the Lord begins. The prophet Joel confirms this. I will show wonders in the heavens and in the earth, blood and fire and pillars of smoke, and the sun shall be turned into darkness, and the moon into blood, before the coming of the great and awesome day of the Lord. Joel 2:30-31. And why is this significant? That we will find out in the next one tomorrow. So tune in for the conclusion of the Seals of the Prophetic Scroll tomorrow. And thank you all for listening.